I remember the moment my wheels touched the deck of the USS Enterprise after the Palau strikes in March 1944, and I honestly felt like I was landing on borrowed time, like the laws of physics and sheer luck had temporarily suspended judgment just for me. The air was thick with the smell of burning oil and sweat, and the sight of that massive, scarred flight deck coming up fast felt less like a homecoming and more like a desperate 11th-hour plea for salvation. We had just flown through hell, pounded Japanese installations on Palau until our planes were running on fumes and prayers. And I'm going to tell you exactly what it's like to try and thread a needle with a battered SBD-5 Dauntless onto a moving postage stamp in the middle of the Pacific, knowing one mistake means the deep, cold ocean floor is your final resting place. But before I even start to tell you about the incredible tension of that landing, the sheer chaos of planes circling and fuel gauges dropping, let me ask you straight up. If you were me, looking down at that deck, seeing the dents from near misses, feeling the shrapnel holes in your own fuselage, and you knew you only had one shot at this landing, would you have pushed the limits of the plane even further, risking a stall just to ensure you didn't foul the deck for the pilots coming in, right behind you? Tell me if my commitment to the squadron, even in that moment of mortal danger, was justified. It all started weeks before, back when the orders for Operation Desecrate 1 came down. I was a young pilot then, flying with an SBD-5 Dauntless Squadron off the Big E, the USS Enterprise, and there was an electrifying, terrifying buzz in the ready room. The target was the Palau Islands, a major Japanese naval base that was absolutely critical to their defense line in the Central Pacific. Our job, the job of the Dauntless dive bombers, was to spearhead the attack. We were the precision guys, the ones who had to put 1,000 pounds of explosives exactly where they needed to go, straight down the smokestack, onto the fuel dumps, into the heart of the airfields. I remember sitting in the briefing, tracing the map with my finger, feeling the weight of the mission. We weren't just hitting targets, we were clearing the path for the invasion of the Marianas, severing a major artery of the Japanese war machine. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the tension in my gut was a constant low-grade thrum. My plane, call sign Lucky Strike, had a fresh coat of blue paint, but underneath, she was a veteran, carrying the scars of Midway and Guadalcanal. Every time I climbed into that cockpit, I felt a connection to her, like we were two parts of the same desperate flying machine. The pre-dawn takeoff on the first day was chaos, choreographed by professionals. The flight deck was a dimly lit, wind-swept stage of roaring engines, flashing signals, and the smell of high-octane fuel. I watched the catapult launch the fighters first, then it was our turn. The launch off the deck is always a punch to the stomach, from standing still to 80 knots in a heartbeat, and then you're just airborne, the massive bulk of the carrier shrinking beneath you. The flight to Palau was long, monotonous hours over an endless blue expanse, the kind of flight that makes you feel utterly isolated and vulnerable. I kept checking my instruments, constantly calculating fuel consumption, and every tiny speck on the horizon made my heart jump. When we finally reached the target area, the sky exploded. The Japanese anti-aircraft fire was insane, a relentless blossoming garden of black smoke and red tracers. It was like flying through a metallic hailstorm. I could hear the tink, tink, tink of shrapnel hitting my fuselage. My gunner, a kid named Eddie who was barely 19 and chewed tobacco like a professional baseball player, was yelling into the intercom, calling out the bursts, his .30 caliber spitting fire to keep the zeros off our tail. The dive was the truly terrifying part. We climbed to altitude, then I pushed the stick forward, and the world tilted into a sickening vertical plunge. The wind screamed past the dive brakes, the engine whined a desperate, high-pitched song, and the target, a fuel depot in this instance, rushed up to meet me. You have to maintain absolute focus. You're fighting the G-forces pressing you into your seat. Your vision is tunneling, and you have to keep that crosshair locked on the target. The adrenaline was so intense it felt like pure electricity running through my veins. At 2,000 feet, I hit the bomb release, felt the jolt as the 1,000-pounder dropped away, and then I yanked back on the stick with everything I had. The recovery was brutal, a near blackout G-pull that shoved the blood into my feet, but when I leveled out, I looked back and saw a massive plume of black, oily smoke rising from the depot. We hit it. We hit it hard. But the cost was heavy. We saw 2 of our guys go down, swallowed by the ocean after taking a direct hit, and their absence left a cold, empty feeling in my stomach. That was the first day, and we had to do it all again and again for 2 more days of non-stop strikes. My beautiful, reliable, lucky strike came back from the final strike peppered with holes, the hydraulics sluggish, and the engine vibrating with a nasty, irregular rhythm that promised disaster at any moment. By the time we turned for home, the anxiety had shifted from the enemy's guns to the fuel gauge. We were stretched. We had pushed the operational envelope to the breaking point. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a dramatic bloody orange as we approached the Enterprise. I was the 8th plane in the landing pattern. Ahead of me, I could see the tiny figures of the landing signal officer, LSO, waving his paddles, his movements precise and utterly critical. I called the ship. "Enterprise, this is Dauntless 507, fuel critical, shot out of hell, requesting clearance." The calm, professional voice of the flight deck officer came back. 507, you are clear for approach. Stand by for LSO guidance. Make it count, son." My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I dropped my landing gear, it shuddered violently, and lowered my hook. The damage to the plane meant everything felt sloppy, unresponsive. I was flying a wounded bird. I had to compensate for the engine's instability and the sticky controls, all while trying to maintain the perfect glide path. The LSO I knew was judging my speed, my altitude, my lineup. Every second felt like an eternity. The plane was bucking, protesting against the air, and my right hand was glued to the throttle, constantly making micro-adjustments. I could see the faces of the deck crew, blurry in the growing dusk, and the massive, inviting number 6 painted on the deck. That number was my target, my salvation. So that's the situation I was in. The fuel warning light was flickering its death message on my panel. The plane was battered. I had 6 other tired, damaged planes stacked up behind me, each of them just as desperate for that deck. The LSO was starting to wave me off. My approach was too low, too slow, and he was worried I'd snag an arrestor wire too early, or worse, crash into the barrier net, blocking the deck for everyone else. I knew a wave-off meant a climb out, a circle, and another shot, which meant burning precious life-saving fuel I simply did not have. I had to decide right then in the final terrifying moments of my approach. Do I obey the LSO, risk running out of fuel and ditching, or do I ignore the wave-off, push the plane past its safe limits and risk a crash landing, all in the hope of saving the plane and keeping the deck clear for my squadron mates who were right on my tail? Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have prioritized the procedure, or would you have risked everything to stick the landing and protect your squadron? I made my decision in a split second of pure animal instinct. The LSO was frantic, waving his hands in a clear go-around signal. But I saw the deck, I saw my spot, and I knew I could make it. I held the stick steady, ignored the wave-off, and dropped the nose slightly, gambling on a perfect power-on stall just above the deck. I heard Eddie shout something, maybe a curse, maybe a prayer, but I was focused completely on the deck. The ship was pitching gently in the swell, the deck rising and falling just enough to make a perfect landing impossible. I fought the plane down, correcting for the wind, correcting for the ship's motion, all the while knowing I was moments from disaster. Then with a jarring, beautiful thump, my wheels hit the wooden deck. I cut the throttle completely, a silent prayer that the arrestor hook would catch. There was a violent, screeching, gut-wrenching jerk as the hook snagged the 3rd arrestor wire, yanking the Dauntless from 90 miles per hour to a dead stop in less than 100 feet. The nose dropped, the prop stopped spinning, and the silence after the engine's roar was deafening. I was safe. I was absolutely, miraculously safe. As the plane handlers rushed in to signal me to taxi forward, I looked back. The LSO was standing there, his hands on his hips, a look of pure, murderous relief on his face. He'd nearly had a heart attack, but the deck was clear, and the roar of the next Dauntless already filled the air. My squadron mates came in one by one. The first one after me landed perfectly, then the next. But the 3rd guy, Lieutenant Barnes, came in too fast. His plane damaged even worse than mine. He hit the deck hard, the hook missed, and he shot straight over the wires, his plane crashing into the barrier net with a terrible, tearing sound of metal and splintering wood. The deck was instantly fouled. It was a disaster. The remaining 3 planes had to divert to another carrier miles away, adding hours to their flight and immense risk. I climbed out of Lucky Strike, my legs shaking, and the first person I saw was the LSO, who walked straight up to me, his face grim. He didn't yell. He just said, "Son, you disobeyed a direct order and almost ended up in the drink, but you also kept the pattern going long enough for 3 others to make it home. You'll be hearing about this." I looked over at the twisted wreckage of Barnes's plane and a wave of nausea hit me. My landing was perfect, but the next one wasn't, and I wondered if my aggressive choice had somehow unsettled the flow, contributing to Barnes's crash. That night I couldn't sleep. The relief of survival was mixed with the cold dread of guilt. Barnes was fine, miraculously, just shaken up, but his plane was totaled. The next morning the captain called me in. He tore into me for disobeying the LSO. Discipline was paramount, he stressed. But then he paused, looked me dead in the eye and said, "However, you brought your plane home under critical conditions, and you had the cojones to trust your gut when procedure would have seen you ditch. You're grounded for a week, but your squadron came home. Now get out of my sight." The consequences were a slap on the wrist, a symbolic punishment. The real aftermath was the haunting memory of that split-second decision and the look on Barnes's face as he was pulled from the wreckage. I learned that day that in war, sometimes the right decision according to protocol is the wrong decision for survival, and vice versa. The line between hero and fool is often just the distance between the second and third arrestor wire. The cost of those Palau strikes was steep, but we crippled the Japanese base and the Enterprise steamed on, a floating city carrying a deadly, relentless purpose. I look back on that landing and realize it wasn't just a physical feat. It was a test of will. A moment where everything I thought I knew about procedure and survival got tossed out the window. It taught me that sometimes you have to risk it all for the greater good of the mission, or maybe just for the survival of your small, terrified family in the sky. It's a moment I'll take with me to the grave. So like this video if you were on my side, if you think I made the right, if risky, choice to save my plane and keep the deck clear. Subscribe for more stories like this where the human drama is as intense as the battle itself. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Tell me if you'd take the chewing out from the captain for the chance at life. I'll see you all in the next story.